Hello, students. Today, we're going to do a complete revision of the chapter Socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. Now, the best way to understand this chapter is to see it as one continuous story, a chain of events. It begins not in Russia, but with new ideas in Europe, which then lead to a massive revolution that changes Russia and the entire world forever. So let's trace this story right from the beginning.
Our revision journey will follow this story in 6 parts. First, we'll look at the new ideas that were spreading across Europe. Then, we'll see why Russia was facing so many problems. After that, we will cover the first revolution of 1905, a kind of warning sign. Then comes the main event, 1917, the year of revolution. And finally, we'll see how the socialists built their new state and the impact it had on the world. Let's begin.
You see, our story doesn't actually start in Russia. It begins much earlier, across Europe. The French Revolution gave us the ideas of liberty and equality. The Industrial Revolution created new cities, new workers, and new problems. And all of this led to new ways of thinking about society itself. These were the ideas that would travel to Russia and spark the revolution. Now, in your exams, it's very important to know the difference between these 3 groups. First, you had the liberals. They wanted change, but slowly. They believed in an elected parliament, but thought only men with property should vote. Next were the radicals. They wanted fast, radical change, a government based on the majority, and they even supported women's right to vote. And finally, the conservatives. They wanted to preserve the old system of kings and nobles and were very resistant to change. So this table is perfect for a 3-mark answer. But a brand new idea was also gaining popularity: socialism. Socialists had a very different view. They looked at the problems of poverty and inequality and said the main cause was private property. Their solution? If society as a whole, collectively, owned the factories and land, then everyone's interests would be taken care of, not just the interests of a few rich individuals. This was a revolutionary idea. So all these new ideas about change and equality were spreading, and they found the most fertile ground in the Russian Empire. You can think of Russia at that time as a tinderbox, a society filled with so many problems, so much anger, that it was just waiting for a single spark to set it all on fire. And a major part of this problem was the condition of the workers. Just look at this image. This is where workers slept after working for maybe 12 or 15 hours a day. These were crowded, dirty dormitories. The conditions were simply terrible. And this suffering created a deep, deep desire for change among the working class. Now, for a 5-mark question on the causes of the revolution, you must remember these 4 points. First was autocracy. This is a key word. It means the Tsar, Nicholas II, had absolute power with no checks. Second, the exploitation of workers, which we just saw. Third, the problem of the peasants. Most land was owned by nobles, but the peasants who farmed it wanted that land for themselves. And fourth, political repression. No political parties were allowed, so you see it was a recipe for disaster.
Now, inside the Russian Socialist Party, there was a split. This is another point of common confusion. You had the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, and the Mensheviks. The main difference was this. Lenin believed that in a repressive country like Russia, the party must be small, disciplined, and professional. The Mensheviks disagreed. They wanted the party to be open to everyone. This disagreement on how the party should be organized would become very important later.
So, with all these problems, the tension finally exploded in 1905. Historians often call this the dress rehearsal for the main revolution of 1917. And it's a perfect name, because while this revolution failed, it was a practice run. It showed everyone that the Tsar was weak, and it taught the revolutionaries very important lessons. What started it all? An event called Bloody Sunday. A peaceful group of workers was marching to the Tsar's palace to give him a petition, but the soldiers opened fire, killing over 100 people. This one act of violence destroyed the people's faith in the Tsar. It triggered strikes and protests all over Russia. Finally, the Tsar was forced to agree to create a parliament, which was called the Duma. But was the Tsar serious about sharing power? No. The promise was empty. He dismissed the first Duma in just 75 days. Then he dismissed the second one too. After that, he changed the voting laws so that only his conservative supporters could get elected. This made one thing crystal clear to the people of Russia. The Tsar would never give up his power willingly. Peaceful change was not an option. This brings us to the most critical part of the chapter, the year 1917. Everything that happened this year was a direct result of the problems that were not solved back in 1905. The anger had been building for 12 years, and now it was about to explode. So, what was the final trigger? The First World War. For Russia, the war was a complete and total disaster. By 1917, Russia had more than 7 million casualties. Back home, there were severe food shortages and industries were shutting down. Most importantly, the war destroyed the army's loyalty to the Tsar. His own soldiers were turning against him. It was the final straw.
So let's revise the timeline of the February Revolution. It started with strikes, many led by women workers. But the real turning point, the decisive moment, came on February 27th. The soldiers were ordered to fire on the protesters, but they refused. Instead, they mutinied and joined the workers. At that moment, it was all over for the Tsar. Without the army, he had no power. A few days later, on March 2nd, he was forced to abdicate. The Russian monarchy was finished.
Now, it is absolutely essential to know the difference between the two revolutions of 1917. The February Revolution was spontaneous. It had no clear leader. Its main goal was simple, just to remove the Tsar. But the October Revolution was completely different. It was a well-planned, organized takeover of power by the Bolsheviks, and its goal was much bigger, to create a socialist state. Understanding this difference is key to a good answer.
Just a quick note to clear up any confusion about the dates. At that time, Russia was using an older calendar, the Julian calendar. The rest of the world used the Gregorian calendar, which we use today. The Julian calendar was 13 days behind. That is why the February Revolution for them was actually in March for us, and their October Revolution was in our November. It's just a simple calendar difference.
So, after the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks were in control. But it's one thing to seize power. It's another thing to build a completely new kind of country. So the question is, what did they do next? How did they go about building the world's first socialist state?
The Bolshevik plan was based on Lenin's 3 simple points, known as his April Theses. His demands were very clear and very popular. Number 1, end the war immediately. Number 2, transfer all land to the peasants. And number 3, nationalize all the banks. These 3 demands were famously summarized in the slogan, peace, land, and bread. It was a simple, powerful message that won them huge support from the people.
But not everyone supported the Bolsheviks. This led to a terrible civil war. To keep it simple, you just need to remember the 3 main groups. First were the Reds, who were the Bolsheviks, fighting to protect their new government. They fought against the Whites, who were supporters of the Tsar and were helped by foreign countries. And then there was a third group, the Greens, who were mainly peasants and other socialists who were fighting for their own goals.
After Lenin died, Joseph Stalin rose to power, and the Soviet Union entered a new phase. In our final section, we will look at Stalin's policies and the long-term impact that the Russian Revolution had on the entire world. One of Stalin's most important policies was rapid industrialization through the 5-year plans. The government took control of the economy and focused all resources on building heavy industry. And the results, in terms of numbers, were stunning. In just a few years, the production of coal, oil, and steel all increased by 100%. A backward agricultural country was being turned into an industrial superpower.
But it is very important to have a balanced view. This industrial growth came at a very high human cost. Stalin's other major policy was collectivization. He forced peasants to give up their private farms and join huge state-controlled farms. Many peasants resisted, and they suffered terribly. This quote from a peasant gives us a glimpse into the pain and loss that people faced. So while there was progress, there was also great suffering.
The Russian Revolution's impact was felt far beyond its borders. The very idea of a worker state was an inspiration to people all over the world. This image, for instance, shows a journal published in Calcutta. Communist parties were formed in many countries, including our own. Many Indian leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and thinkers like Rabindranath Tagore were very impressed by the Soviet experiment and its promise of social equality.
So there you have it. The complete story, revised from beginning to end. You can see the logical flow. It starts with new ideas in Europe, which found a home in Russia because of its many problems. This led to the revolutions. And finally, the creation of a new kind of state that changed the world. If you understand this flow, you understand the entire chapter. Take a deep breath. You are prepared.